well-known valleys which form the Yorkshire Dales National Park is an almost empty, little-known landscape. Here there are far more sheep than people. Three great peaks, Whernside, Ingleborough, Pennygent, oversee the largest outcrop of limestone in the whole of Britain. To the east of the park is Millstone Grit, forming airy ridges. The Dales country is bound together by hundreds of miles of stone walls, made without a dab of mortar. Most visitors to the Dales are content to stay in the valleys. So will we, most of the time, though we will take an interest in any special features seen during our journey. Most of the filming took place at the height of a hot, dry summer, but variety is a key word in the Dales. Nothing is more varied than the weather. We have sequences shot in springtime and also in a harsh, white winter. We'll drop in to see Edith Carr at Langcliffe. She will tell us of her life as a farmer's wife on Malham Moor, and we will see her novel and colourful garden built of her plants which he set in tubs. We will start our journey of discovery in my home village of Giggleswick, which stands beside a beck called Thames, though the spelling is different from the much more famous river in London. When I was a small boy going on holiday to Morecambe, I used to travel by train with the family, and we passed through Giggleswick. And people always pointed out the school chapel and indicated that it probably was an observatory. But of course it is a chapel. It's a dome chapel, which makes it rather unusual. It was a gift to Giggleswick School by Walter Morrison, the Craven millionaire who lived at what he called his mountain home up by Malham Tarn. He was a governor of the school. He travelled extensively in the east. He'd been very impressed by the dome as a feature of architecture. And so here we have an eastern sort of building which is at the edge of an old Yorkshire village. In fact, when it was constructed, one of the villagers said, "What they want having an heathen temple up on top of the hill, what's wrong with parish church?" One story I remember about it that always amuses me is the decision to site it at this particular spot. It is said that Walter Morrison, his architect and builder, came up onto this gritstone knoll above Giggleswick. Walter Morrison plunged the point of his umbrella into the ground and said, "Build it here," and they built it here. And of course he wouldn't have got away with it today. He would have needed planning permission. Sitting by the grave of Dr. Buck, who was a local medical practitioner, he was a great friend of Edward Elgar in the days when Elgar was a young man. And Elgar used to visit him in the 1880s. Here he composed some of his early work, and here he joined in quite a few pranks with his friend. They used to call them japes, and one of them consisted of kidnapping a parrot, which they took down to settle, and the bottom of the cage fell out. The bird escaped and had to be rounded up and returned to its owner. But it just shows that Elgar wasn't as solemn as many people imagine he was. During the day, Elgar and Dr. Buck went out and about, quite often with the horse and carriage that Dr. Buck used to visit his patients. At other times they would stride across Giggleswick Scars, and in the evening they met to make music. A little group of people were mustered at Buck's house. Buck smoked pipes, so many pipes that his daughter spent an hour or so rekindling them before each evening's performance. Elgar was a great smoker, so were the others. And indeed, in the little house at Giggleswick where Dr. Buck lived, the music room had a special appendage to the door. This was a little trap door at the top of the door, and it was opened on music nights so that the smoke from the pipes could escape to other parts of the house. One of the few remaining letters of Dr. Buck was written in 1932, the year in which he died, and he wasn't feeling very happy. He was ill. Elgar wrote a very chirpy letter back, and he mentioned some of the joys and pleasures of visiting Giggleswick 50 years before, just 50 years as a matter of fact. And he mentioned in particular the delights of potted Ribble trout. You could almost hear him smacking his lips as you read that particular note from this great composer. We resume our travels in a clockwise fashion, visiting the village of Austwick, set under limestone scars and quiet because it stands well back from the busy A65 road. Austwick is fortunate in having 2 greens. The village shop does well to survive in these days of supermarkets. Austwick Beck flows clear and cool from the head of slaty Cromachdale, and the water joins the Lune and eventually pours into the Irish Sea. Austwick attracts all kinds of visitors. Some are prepared to travel slowly. Horses do not like to be rushed. The majestic limestone scar of Norber, or North Hill, has on its flanks a cluster of old grey rocks, some of them perched on pedestals of limestone. The old rocks were scooped from their place by the Cromachdale glacier and dumped on limestone a mile or so away. The limestone was eroded by wind, rain and frost, except for that immediately under the rocks. Before we venture towards our next village, we will look briefly at the hamlet of Wharf. The farmstead with its outbuildings, all built of locally quarried stone and slate, looks from a distance like a natural outcrop of rock. Dry stone walls form a futuristic pattern on the landscape. They also hem in the old packhorse tracks, now followed eagerly by walkers heading for the fells. Anyone can farm when it's sunny. The Dales farmer knows how to survive with thin soils, grim weather, and long, hard winters. Across Ingleborough, which the poet Lawrence Binion called the Big Blue Hill lies Ingleton. This village has had a vigorous industrial past, with quarrying on the grand scale. But early on its waterfalls in well-wooded valleys attracted tourists, thousands of tourists, arriving by train. Well, Ingleton has been advertised as the land of waterfalls and caves. It's also been a busy industrial centre. There was something called Ingleton granite, which was actually a mudstone, but that was quarried round here, and limestone as well, and the kiln immediately behind is the Hoffman kiln, which was introduced last century for the continuous burning of lime. It was very, very labour intensive. This particular kiln was started off by two men who found the production didn't keep up with their expectations, and so they arranged for another kiln to be built over at Langcliffe near Settle. And in typical Victorian fashion they said, "Make it 3 times as big," and the man got on with it. In this particular case, a flue went up the hillside and there was a chimney at the top of the hill. At Langcliffe, an enormous chimney protruded straight from the kiln. But they are very, very impressive examples of Victorian technology. Well, I've just come down a little track bed connected with Mealbank Quarry. There'll be trucks and little contractors' locomotives coming down here, but the really big railway at Ingleton was the little North Western Railway, which ran up to the big viaduct, and coming down from the north there was another company which also used the viaduct, and so a little bit of competition developed. And indeed, eventually the Midland took over the southern part. The London North Western, one of its great rivals, took over the northern part, and passengers had got to get off at one end of the viaduct and walk across the valley, or be taken across the valley to join a train at the other side, which was quite ridiculous. The one notable thing about this area is that Dale, which lies quite near to Ingleton, is the only little dale in the country, I think, which has got a railway viaduct at each end. Ingleton's got one, and right up at the top of the dale you've got the most famous viaduct of them all, Ribblesdale. Near the big railway viaduct, a man and his collie dog are rounding up sheep. We're now in the churchyard of St Leonard's, Dale. This little chapel used to be the one serving what was called Ingleton Fells, and today the Vicar of Ingleton comes out to attend to it. When the railway was being built at the top of the dale, There's quite a lot of traffic, of course, between Ingleton and Ribblehead. And one day a man called James Mather set off from the Welcome Home Inn up at Ribblehead to come down to the town. While he was there was a runaway horse, and he very nobly grabbed it, but unfortunately he was dragged under its hoofs and killed. And this is the tombstone to James Mather, who died in 1872. This very ornate gravestone relates to Job Hurst, who was a subcontractor on the Settle Carlisle Railway. His particular interest was in Ribblehead Viaduct. When he died, he was so highly respected that his workmen and others clubbed together and bought him this handsome stone. I'm afraid the lettering's going now, but indeed it does say that he died in 1872. Being at Ingleton, it is hard to resist travelling through Dentdale, on our way to Thwaite, at the head of Swaledale. We approach by way of Buttertup's Pass through a landscape as austere as any in the country. Thwaite is named after a Viking word for clearing, just as Keld, a few miles up the dale, is named after an old word for a spring, water being a vital necessity. Richard and Cherry Kearton, pioneers of wildlife photography, were sons of a local gamekeeper who eventually found employment in London. Taking advantage of a new method of blot making, they were able to illustrate their wildlife books with real photographs. Richard stayed in this country. Cherry settled in Africa, where he photographed the big game. Their birthplace has carvings of wildlife round the front door. Hang gliders make use of the updraft, where the land rises to Fleet Moss, the highest stretch of road in the Yorkshire Dales. Way down below at the village of Gayle near Hawes, others seek food. Gayle, which is best known for the ford, which is still regularly used, and for the geese which haunt it, has for long been a village which has combined farming with craftwork. It has the oldest textile mill in the land, dating from the 18th century but no longer used. The houses were made of slate and stone wrenched from the nearest hillsides. Gayle is a place where people come to look at the geese and the ducks. It's also a place where a lot of people come these days because in Gayle Road there is in fact a creamery where Wensleydale cheese, that marvellous Wensleydale cheese, is still made. As we travel eastwards through Wensleydale, we approach Bainbridge, which in the old days was an important settlement in the forest of Wensleydale. Each evening in winter, 3 blasts are sounded on the old forest horn. Many of the houses overlook wide green spaces and the village stocks, which are attractive to visitors with cameras. On nearby Brough Hill is the site of a Roman fort. The river is the Bain, the overflow from Semmerwater. 2 miles long, it is considered to be the shortest river in England. As we progress towards Kettlewell, we stop for a while at Aysgarth Falls, one of the most popular haunts in the Dales Park. There are 3 falls, tumbling over horizontal layers of rock, which give the water a very neat appearance. Bishop Pocock compared them favourably with the cataracts of the Nile. Kettlewell in Upper Wharfedale has had a busy past, its principal industry being lead mining. At the time the miners worked here, their thirst was satisfied by no less than 13 halehouses. Just 3 remain today, and Kettlewell relies largely on tourism for its economic well-being. Whenever I come to Kettlewell, I like to walk into the churchyard here and see this grave to Cutcliffe Hine, because I've got several of his books at home. He was a writer whose great character was someone called Captain Kettle. Cutcliffe Hine, whose daughter still lives in the village, was a very adventurous sort of man. He'd pan gold out in the New World, and in fact in the 1930s he rather startled the people around here by taking his panning equipment to some of the streams round Kettlewell, and he actually found some gold, but in such small quantities that it was hardly worth the effort of going. Also here at Kettlewell, buried in the family plot, is his son, who died quite young on the Somme in the First World War, and inside the church is a beautiful window to his memory. On our visit to Kettlewell, we came across this exhausted rambler. I rushed forward, possibly to give him the kiss of life, but in fact it's a scarecrow, just one of the items on a wonderful scarecrow trail. The recent dry summers have reduced our Dales rivers to a trickle and have dried up the upland watercourses. It is difficult to believe that these scenes in Upper Wharfedale relate to the River Wharfe, a major Yorkshire river. We now almost literally drop in on Arncliffe. This village in Littondale was known to millions of people as the setting for early episodes of Emmerdale Farm, a television production. buildings around the green have changed little over the years. The Falcon is run by a member of the Miller family. His father, Marmaduke, achieved fame as a watercolourist. The church you see in the background is that at Arncliffe in Littondale. And the river you can hear is the River Scurfair, which flows over a lovely limestone bed. It's a famous trout river, and possibly when Charles Kingsley, the author and parson and social reformer, came to Arncliffe, it was partly because of its reputation for trout fishing. He came along one day when he was visiting Walter Morrison up at Malham Tarn, and it said that he came down to Bridge House, which is not very far from here, and had afternoon tea with a lady called Miss Hammond. And Miss Hammond appears in Kingsley's classic book, The Water Babies, and she became the lady in the red petticoat who Tom the chimney sweep saw when he come down from the hills after escaping from the big house and from his cruel master, Mr. Grimes. Kilnsey Crag stands like an enormous grey sphinx in the upper part of the wharf. It's a great boss of limestone, and years ago visitors just couldn't resist picking up stones and hurling them towards the crag. It was a great thing if anybody actually hit the crag, because it must be 150 feet away from the road. In the old days it was relatively easy because people also threw coins. The old cartwheel money seemed to go the furthest, and a friend of mine many years ago, with the approval of the landowner, went out looking for them and actually picked up a few. But it's this little contest which on Kilnsey Crag, which you see there behind, that means that the wall down by the road is not as high as it might be. Linton, which won an award for its prettiness, is ranged on either side of a beck spanned by several bridges and with pools to tempt young anglers. The most stupendous piece of architecture is the Fountain Hospital, almshouses donated by Richard Fountain, who became an alderman of London. To me, this little village of Linton is the haunt of writers. Arthur Raystreak, one of the great historians of the Dales, lived here for many years, and at Thwaite Abbey, which is just across the beck here, lived Halliwell Sutcliffe. He was a man who came from the Bradford district, but eventually settled down here at Linton, and of his enormous output, the best remembered book is called The Striding Dales. It's a very romantic book. He managed to dredge up all the old legends. I don't think Arthur Raystreak really saw eye to eye with him over some of them. But he went on, wrote this book, and it's still in print after many years. He told the story of Pam the fiddler. He told the story of the cobblers who worked at Thorpe, and he had many tales to tell, but he also had a very romantic turn of phrase, and some of his phraseology is quite memorable. He always spoke of the Dales where the lean lands rake the sky. This was the style of Halliwell Sutcliffe, who used to concentrate his writing at night, and I suspect at times by purple light, but has left an enduring impression upon the prose of the Yorkshire Dales. Today the village is enjoyed by many. Young people tend to gravitate towards the sparkling beck. Malham, which attracts 500,000 visitors a year, has attractions over a wide area to encourage them to spread out. The village itself has a Dales Park centre and a working blacksmith. Malham Cove is a gleaming limestone cliff with a height of 240 feet. Beyond the cove is an upland tarn. The water laps in a saucer of slate with limestone all around. Edith Carr has memories of farm life on Malham Moor, 1,000 feet above sea level. Well, Edith, it's lovely to meet you again. Some years ago you came down bank, as they say in the Dales. You used to farm up on the tops, up on Malham Moor, didn't you?
That's right. It was a very lonely life up there, but I was young and I didn't think much about it. We lived up there about 23 years, and my children were all born and bred up there, and they loved it as well. But unfortunately, the farm was a rented farm, and it had to be sold. And it went at such a big price, we just couldn't buy it. So this is how we came to live at Langcliffe.
But it was a wild time up on Malham Moor, wasn't it?
It sure was, and there were some wild people up on Malham Moor at that time. There was, you know, but they were all really good neighbours, and we used to go to each other's house in the evenings, and we had a right good life together.
Winter used to last a long time up there, didn't it?
It did. We used to get all the things in for stock, and the first thing we did would be to get about 5 or 10 tons of coal, big blocks of coal, and it was quite a job, because they used to come with this coal, and it was all to stack up, and it was quite a job. And then bags of flour we got, and oatmeal, big tins of lard, that came in big round tins. We always had to get plenty of food in.
You can usually reckon on a bit of snow in those days, couldn't you?
Yes. It's surprising how the seasons have altered. It has. It's quite funny, really, because in those days, every winter you could reckon on a good snowfall, and the roads blocked.
And we're talking about life at over 1,000 feet above sea level, aren't we?
That's right,
I mean, if there's going to be any snow anywhere, it'll land on Malham Moor first, won't it?
It would. When I went to Malham Moor, first of all, it was in November. I distinctly remember going to that farm, and it was in November. And I went by horse and cart, and when I got to the very top of the hill up there was a barn up there in those days, and it was called Catna Barn. And you could see Catna Barn from all around. It was a landmark, was Catna Barn. And when we got up there, I just couldn't believe it. It was all covered with snow. Well, down in the valley, it was green. But we're on the snow line then, and got over the top of the hill. Well, it was all white. I thought, what sort of a place have I come to? I thought I'd never settle, but I did.
And if you wanted to get a Malham Moor a shivering, you just had to mention 1947.
That's right. That was a terrible do.
When did it start?
It started, now just let me think, our children, they finished school for Christmas and they didn't go back after Easter holidays. And all that time it was blowing blizzards, and every night, if it did, the snow just stop a little bit, it came this terrible hard frost. All the sky was red, and it was awful.
It was a time when you were also thankful for the RAF, weren't you?
Yes, yes. We just had nothing at all. It had got to desperation, nearly. And one day the postman came, and they came every third day, and they walked from Settle. And he says, have you heard it? I said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? He says, I've heard it on the radio. They're going to drop you some food and hay. Oh, I said, is that true? He said, yes. What you have to do, you have to make a big cross in the front meadow, and when you hear an aeroplane coming, you have to set it on fire to make like a smoke signal. And I said, when are they coming? He said, they're coming tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. So we got all prepared for it, and we made this huge cross in the field, and we put a lot of paraffin and old engine oil, soaked it. And we waited, and 3 o'clock, there was nothing, and, you know, very despondent. We thought, well, this is it, they're not coming. And now, about 4 o'clock, we could hear zoom, zoom, and we looked up, and they were coming, and they were Dakotas in those days, and they'd come from Dishworth Aerodrome, and these, we could see them, and so quickly we made the fire, and they came quite low. When they got to the farm, they went round once or twice to make certain that was the place, and then they opened the doors, and we could see the men quite distinctly, and they were waving to us, and first of all they dropped us boxes out with food, groceries. That all fell down. Of course, it all split open, but we didn't mind about that. We thought, well, it's food, and now we'll pick it up after. And then they started dropping hay, big bales of hay. And you see, they were going round and round and dropping the hay. It was a big circle of hay. But unfortunately, again, that all burst open. But at least it was something. One day after the worst of it, my husband went out and he says, come here. I said, what is that? He said, just listen. And it was a curlew. We could hear a curlew. And there was still all the snow and ice on the fields. He says, the curlews are coming. He says, it'll be all right soon. And we were pleased to see the curlews come back here.
Paths lead from Malham to Gordale Scar and Janet's Foss, always a popular place with tourists. this is Janet's Foss, and Foss is an old Norse word meaning a waterfall, and Janet was supposed to be the queen of the fairies. There's hardly any water going over the Foss today, and so we can actually see the cave where she was supposed to live. But I ask you, can you imagine a fairy living in that sort of place down there? A dank and mossy hole. More likely she was a water sprite, or perhaps even a witch. But the old stories suggest that she was queen of the fairies, and so let it be that. The only thing is about fairies up in the North Country is they tend to get their wands broken, and they also tend to get their ballet dresses begrimed by all the muck from the rocks and the rest of it. But it's a fascinating little place. It's a little amphitheatre. The wrens sing here. Blue tits sound like pneumatic drills because of the acoustic qualities here. And you get the water, which is the water from Goredale Scar, pouring over the tufa. And the tufa is built up from layers of limestone laid down over a great many years. On top of that you get moss, and in these very dry conditions also grass. We now return to Ribblesdale and to the village of Horton, which has a great limestone quarry as a backdrop. It is the most popular starting point for walkers on the Pennine Way. The church of St Oswald dates from 1120 AD and has some ancient stained glass featuring the mitred head of Thomas a Becket. Well, a lot of the place names of the Dales were given by the Vikings over 1,000 years ago, but here at Horton in Ribblesdale, the big hill is Celtic, Pennygent meaning Hill of the Winds, and all around us there's what appears to be slate, a kind of greyish blue hard rock which is quarried just locally over 1 or 2 miles around this village. And it's actually a Silurian mudstone, but you find it everywhere, in walls, in houses, as floorings, as the shelves in dairies. And here in the churchyard it provides flagstones for the path, it provides roofs for the lich gates, and even bases for the foot scrapers. Well, as you can see, the Dales have been loved to death, at least this part of the Dales, because what I came down just now was part of the Three Peaks Walk, which is undertaken every year by thousands of people. And of course, in dry weather it's not so bad, but when the weather's wet, people literally bring away parts of the mountain on their boots. Edith Carr moved to Langcliffe she established a most unusual garden at the front of her house. There's even the skull of an old tup. Tell me about your Langcliffe garden.
It does give me a lot of pleasure. I can, although it's only quite small, I can go out in an evening, take a pair of scissors and clipping all the dead heads off, and I can spend an hour or 2 hours just poking about, and it's surprising how much pleasure a garden can give you. Most of the plants that I have are things that come every year. And I find things that come every year, it's not so much trouble, you see. You can count on them coming up. Other bits and pieces I've saved and what people's given me. And
so it's a right Dales garden. I mean, some of it's been given and some of it's been borrowed, and some of
right. And so some
not
of
much of it
just
bought.
been nipped off as
Yes.
cuttings. But it's great, isn't it?
Anyway, congratulations. It's a lovely garden and it's probably unique. I don't
Well,
know of
I
another one
suppose
which is built up on oil drums and a milk kit. Every Dale's story begins and ends with winter. Some say it lasts for 8 months of the year. It has its moments of beauty. We've seen 10 Dales villages. There are many more to explore.